Hi, Michelle. How are you doing? We'll start in a couple minutes. You want to check out the lab? Hi, Kevin. We're going to do pandas today. Ghislaine. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go into screen share. I think for those who are going to join us shortly, they might be. So in this lab, we are going to do pandas. And I'm not going to use Conda or Anaconda, so we can just straight use Panda install in our system. First off, what we can do is we can start with installing Panda. Or you can, if you're using an IDE, you can go into Tools, Manage Plugin, and then you can put in Pandas. And it would find it. So the 1.3.3, you can click install if you're using Tawny. If you're not using Tawny, you can open up command prompt. And in command prompt, you simply just issue pip3 install pandas. And since I've done it, so it's going to say that it's already satisfied, but for your system, if you install Panda, it takes a few minutes to pull the packages. So you want to use the packages for various things, and we're going to talk about data frames that we're going to use today. So make sure that you install Panda. So Panda's installation is here. And if you're using Tawny, make sure that you install the plugins that is Panda. Okay. So I broke this lab into a few parts. I kind of want to ease us into building the data frame and then graphing it, and then going into further in doing pulling data from a file, CSV file. Okay. So when you look at Panda documentation, I want to show you this. You can start with 10 minutes to Panda. And this is kind of like what I included. Some of it, I pull it for the notes. It talks about how to use Panda or show an example. Now, if you wanted to see how you can get started, if you want to use Conda, this is the information for Conda. And then we talked about pip. And here they have a lot of different tutorial. So the things that we're going to work with today is going to be data frame. And think of data frame as a table, or what we've seen in the array when we're using Numpy. And we will also use Numpy shortly. So it's going to give you like a spreadsheet like structure. And you can also use index to be able to access certain element in the data frame. So it is a data container that we are going to create. And the great thing about it is that you can do a lot with the data frame, as you've seen in the example in the notes. You can use it for dates. You can use it for pulling a file and creating the entire file in your data frame and be able to access it. So when you look at the documentation, there are some resources, and also I know that the Pandas cookbook is there. Keep in mind that the cookbook was written a while back, and it's using Jupyter Notebook as illustration. So there's some stuff that might not work with your IDE or idle, but it will work in Jupyter because, in Jupyter, you don't have to issue print. It runs like a shell. So when you issue a certain statement, it will automatically output, but in a regular IDE, you have to issue print or show or some kind of method for it to really show that on screen. So what you can do is you can look at how you can set up the table and then creating the plots, which is what we're going to do, and also use that for statistic calculation, and we'll touch back into this later on. And then time series and text. It even, when we touch on pandas and also going to Matplotlib, you can see that we can use it for images. Some people, they use it to integrate image recognition for the system. So you can refer to the documentation. I put the link there. We're also going to use Matplotlib. And Matplotlib mainly it's going to give you charts or graph. I know if you took 30B, you look a little, we touch a little bit on this. So today, once again, you can visualize your data by looking at this. So the reason why I incorporate this component is that when you work with Pandas and Matplotlib, likely that you will have, if you have a lot of data, you can visualize your data, you can compare your data, and that's the whole point. To create that data structure. So in the assignment, it starts with installing Pandas, and then it introduces you to a simple data frame. So let me open that up and we'll talk about that. So here it is. You want to start with the import statement at the top, and we want to import pandas, and we're going to import panda as, and you're going to give it an identifier. So that will be PD, or you can call it pan or whatever that will be unique. Just make sure that you use it throughout the program. Then we are also going to import Matplotlib pyplot, and we're going to call that plot. So that way we can actually chart or create a scatter plot. Then you can create a container. And in this, I have tuples that are nested into a list. So it's a list of tuples. And we're going to call this data. Then we can give it some values. So 12, 24, 53, 18, 37, 62, 19, 70. And notice that they're pairs. So these values represent X and Y. Then in the next line, what we're going to do is we are going to create an object called DF. And this object is going to be it's going to store our data frame. And since it's going to be data frame, we need to bring PD down. So PD, and then we are going to use data frame class. So we want to make sure that data frame is in here. That's what is coming from Pandas. And then part of the data frame is that the argument you want to put in, the type of data that you want to incorporate, and how you want to set up the columns or the dimension of your data frame. So we wanted to say X and Y as these are X and Y's here. So you can name your column anything you want, but I just wanted to stick with the traditional two-dimensional graph, and X as the horizontal axis and Y is the vertical axis. So once you create your data frame, then you can print it or you can plot it. So you can simply print and it will just show the content, but we want to plot it after we build the data frame. So to plot, you would then bring down the object that contains your data frame. And then we're going to utilize plot, which we specify up here when we import Matplotlib, pyplot. And the type of chart that you're going to use is going to be scatter. So if you're using different type of chart, you want to make sure that you look at the example or the documentation, because there are criteria or specific things that you want to put into your arguments. So here is the scatter plot method. And for scatter, it's going to give us two dimension, X and Y. Yeah, so if you don't have Matplotlib, thank you, Michelle, for bringing that up. You need to also install it because it might throw an error. Okay, so check. So you want to do pip3 install Matplotlib. Okay, and then once it's installed, it's already there. Or you can go into here, manage plugins, and then you can do Matplotlib, and then you can click install there. So it's going to bring in the packages. Okay, now I know that there are some plot method that also correlates with the Pandas package, but that's a different method than what you would use with scatter or a specific type of graph. So then what we have is we are going to have X-axis and Y-axis, and you would have the title. And keep in mind that I'm going to keep my graph simple right now. The example that you see on the website, you can format to add legends and things like that. That will also be included in your arguments in the scatter plot. So it really depends on what you want to include. Then once we have the plot, we want to display it. So we are going to use the show method. Now you can have the block is true here, but if you do plot.show, it's still going to be able to execute that. So I'm going to go ahead and run this so you can see. So once it's built, the only thing that we ask the program to show is going to be our plot, which is this. So the only thing that's going to be displayed is going to be our plot. We didn't ask the program to print or anything, so we didn't include that in the program. So what we have here is it's going to plot out, right, your X and Y. And this exercise mainly to show you that you can have your list of tuple and bring that into the data frame and use that data frame to visualize your data. So let's say that you want to run create an application that would have a data frame, and then you want to do some comparison to show the user or allow the user to compare and display it in graph. You can definitely use Panda and Matplotlib to be able to do that. And if you look into data analysis, this is the area really is where we would use Python and the libraries that would support, right, your data structure like this. Okay. Any question? So for part A, it asks you to create that program and you would run it, right? Simply, we only have a few lines, very quick. And once we have the program, we are gonna take a screen capture. And based on that example, we're gonna move forward to the next step. Now, as you read in the notes, right, and also the documentation, you can find that you can do a lot more with Panda than just, creating a basic data frame like this. You can incorporate a dictionary into your data frame. You can, automate some of the data frame like using date. You can, later on, you can put in your CSV file. So you can bring in the CSV file and or data from a CSV file and be able to use the data there. Any question? Now with scatter, if you don't include X and Y, it's gonna complain. It's not gonna like that. So make sure that you specify what your coordinates would be. And then also for the data frame, we want to say, well, how that's going to be from, which coordinate is going to be incorporated as we have them in pairs X, Y from our tuple here. Now, aside from just the development, you might use this in, system analysis where you have, system information and you need to be able to plot it. You can simply write a script, bring in your data, and then be able to graph it out. Okay, any question with this? Okay, so you can see the same script there. Then for 4, it asks you to write a Python program that uses pandas to create a data frame from a 14x2 array that contains random values. Then plot the values using scatter plot. So the main difference between the number 1 or number 2 and number 4 is that number 4 we are going to use randomized value. Okay. And then we just need to provide the screen capture of our script and our output. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. And let me open up my example for you. So like the other one, we're going to start with the import statement. We're going to have import pandas as PD. But I'm also going to use Numpy because I want to randomize my data. And so I'm going to import Numpy as NP. Sorry, the thing here is wrong. Okay. Then I changed the lab exercise as I was writing the script. I forgot to note it. All right, then we are going to have an object called data. And we want to be able to generate randomized value that will be stored in data. So here we would use Numpy, and then we would use random ran n, and we would put in our shape, like what we talked about last time. So after you have your data, then you can use it to make a data frame. So we have another object called df, and we are going to use Panda to create our data frame. We're going to bring our data down. So data is data. And we want to, in this case, I'm only going to, because scatter is going to be 2-dimension with X and Y coordinates, I wanted to use only 2 column, right? As it is 2 column here. So we're going to do A and B. So we're just going to give it some label there, right? Our column. So once you have your data frame, then you're going to plot. Just like the last one, we are going to bring down our data frame, and we're going to use plot.scatter method. And we would say which coordinate is X, or which column is X, which column is Y. Because your data, think of it like a spreadsheet, right? So it's flat, it's going to be rows and columns. Then we're going to give it a title. And then we're just going to show. So when we run this, you would have your A as X here, and then B. And then the randomized value is there. And if you want to see what they are, you can print, right, your data. So it will show that, but I did not do that. So I just wanted to plot it out. And when you put your cursor on a certain dot on your graph, it would tell you the value on the bottom right, as you can see there. And again, we want to have Numpy, Pandas, Matplotlib for these programs. So you want to make sure that you do pip 3 for all of them. And then you can write and run your program. So similar to the last one, only a few lines, and we're able to achieve the visualization of our data that was randomly generated, and we scatter plotted it. So transition from number 2 to this one, right? The only difference that we made was to use Numpy to randomize our value or for data, and then bring that data into your data frame. So as you see, the progression in this is that first you have to have some form of data, then you would use that data and put it into a container, which is a data frame, and then you would use that data frame to be able to graph it. Now, if you use Jupyter or other type of engines, what you see is that, slightly different. You can just you don't have to do the show. You can just plot it, and it's going to give you the visualization inside the actual notebook or the Jupyter Lab. But in the regular IDE, you have to make sure that you show your graph. as there's not built-in execution task for that feature. Any question? See a chat? Yeah, so no. You can import random, but you know, I know we did that for the assignment, but when you do Numpy, if you use ran-in, you can it's already built in with Numpy. And when you use the IDE like Tawny or Visual Studio Code, if there's certain statement that's not being utilized, it'll tell you. So, okay. Questions? Okay, so number 2 is fairly simple. Once you have your plot and your script written and run it, you get the plot. Make sure you take a screen capture. Okay. Okay. So let's move forward to part B. So as you see, we've been working with 2 columns, pretty small setup data. Now what we can do is we can change our graph to something that will be a little different. So we can do histogram. So like the last one, in this example, what you see is that we are going to also generate randomized value. And in this one, we are going to do 4 columns and 10 rows. And each of the column, we just give it a name, A, B, C, D. So we start with importing Panda. We are going to import Numpy as NP. We are going to use Matplotlib. So we have to import Matplotlib, pyplot. Then we are going to have data that's going to be randomized. And it's going to put your randomized values into 4 columns and 10 rows. So it's a table. And we use the shape to structure the random value there. Then we have an object called df for our data frame. And we're going to use panda.dataframe to create the data frame. And then we're going to bring down the data that we created using random. And then we would specify our column A, B, C, D. Unlike scatter, histogram is a little easier. You can format your histogram to look a certain way by adding in additional arguments, but I just want to plot it and show the title for this one to make it simple for you. So we are going to bring down the data frame and we're going to use plot.hist for histogram. And then we're going to show it. So that's a program. Let me close this. We're going to run it. The nice thing about Matplotlib is that it would also give you, right, the color coding for each of the column. And you can change up the color by programming it. Okay, so you can specify like what color is the column A, B, C, D, but if you don't, it automatically just default to these colors. So we would then have a histogram of our data, and that would be 4 columns, 10 rows. Any question? So in this exercise, we achieve graphing histogram, right? And again, we repeatedly create data frame using pandas. We also use Numpy to generate randomized values for our table, which will be used for data in the data frame. Now, if I run this again, I will get a different graph with a different value because again, it's even though it's pseudo random, right? It will be somewhat close, as it would seed from the same position, but what you have is you would have slightly different value. Oh, I forgot to change this also. Any question? So the second time it looks a little different. See that? And you can always grab this image, right? If you use Tawny, it lets you save the figure and then you can import it into your write-up or documents or whatever. So that was number 5. We want to take a screen capture of our program and our output. Then now we are going to work with number 6, which is going to be, there's a table given to us. So we're not randomize the data. We are going to create a container that's going to store our values from the table. So here what you have is you have 3 columns, A, B, and C, and you have 4 rows. So number 6 asks us to create the data frame using pandas and then use it to plot a histogram graph. So just like the last one, I'm going to use pandas. So I need to import it, Numpy. I need to import Numpy and Matplotlib so I can do a histogram plot. And you can refer to the last example, pretty close to that. The only difference is that we are going to have data that's not randomly generated. So our data here, I'm going to put it into an array, and then I'm going to use the array method from Numpy to create my array. And you want to initialize these values. So then once I have the array with all the values using array method from Numpy, I would use that data to create a data frame. So here I would have a df object again, panda data frame, and my data is going to be data. And then the columns, I'm going to call it A, B, and C. And then we're going to plot using df. So df.plot, and it's going to be a histogram. And then we want to say histogram of ABC. And we want to show it. So at this point, we can run it. And that's what we have. So histogram, if you don't specify, right, it would take your value and then it's going to look at the frequency of how often those values appear. This would be useful when you're looking at, things like, well, we're going to look at fire in a little bit, but let's say you wanted to measure how frequent is earthquake at a certain fault, or you can look at, temperature in California, or you can look at, I saw some stuff on customer complaints. I think the example they use in Pandas, they pull all the reviews from customer for a certain product, and then they create a data frame, and then they look at, the frequency of a certain type of complaints in the review. Any question? So if you could do the last one, then this one should be pretty simple, because this one kind of, it entails the stuff that we talked about on Monday as well. So we did some work with Numpy, so that kind of cover a little bit of array there. Okay, so once we have the program, we would then provide our script in our output screen capture. So by doing something very simple like this, you can start expanding on, right? Because you already have the foundation in this, in that you know how to use the library, you know how to bring in the data, and you know how to use that data to make data frame, and then you know how to plot the data. Now you can make it, you can elevate it by, you know, using a specific graph, by making, you know, your data, you can output a certain set of data and so on. Any question? Okay. So I want to keep it a little light today, as this stuff is also fairly new, right? And again, I encourage you to look at the documentation, the tutorials, the example in their documentation, and then work with those so you can further, you know, you can further your skills in this area. All right, let's take a look at the one that we're going to do is going to be our CSV file part C. We're going to have a short session today. If I'm going too fast, if you need me to slow down, let me know. Okay. I'm going to show you number 7 through 9, and then you will have to do number 10 on your own, which is based on number 7. You can use that. Okay, so there are tons of data online. You already saw that when we first did this in the first week. Okay. If you prefer to use another set of data, that's fine with me, but I wrote this instruction based on the file that you're going to get. Okay. I wanted to keep it, so when you start with using CSV file, use something that's small enough so you can understand. And then once you understand how to use it with Python, then you can start expanding and work with the larger data set. Keep in mind that large data set, you have to clean up quite a bit because there's tons of stuff that's going to be in there that you don't need, okay, for a specific purpose of your program. So, you know, in data analysis, a lot of the time there's also a tremendous amount of tasks just to clean up the data. And so we want to start with something simple and small. And then after that, you can, you know, you can pull Twitter and customer reviews and all the fun stuff that's online, and you can play with that. Okay. All right. So if you go to this link that I provided, it's going to take you to data.gov, which uses DataCan. And I had already filtered it to the state of California. So that way, I wanted to use something that would be relevant to you or to all of us. Okay. And as you can see, this is some of the newer data that you will find. And you can narrow down, you can filter it down to the specific. Okay. So you are going to go halfway down and you're going to find this section where it says 2020s, California wildfire parameters. And basically they log the areas that were burning in 2020. And you would see that there are many different type of files here. So for something that would, if you want to use mapping, you would use ArcGIS, this right here. Okay. And then there's also JSON, HTML, KML, and zip file. So we're interested in downloading the CSV. And we talked in the past that CSV is like Excel spreadsheet. Once you download it, Microsoft is going to want to use Excel to open it up. And that's fine. At times, we're going to have to open it up and look at the content. So we know exactly what the column name is going to be, right? The type of column that we're going to use. So you are going to click CSV, this one, and you're going to download. Okay, it would say 2020 CSV. And then if you're interested in other, you can pull the other stuff there, but we are going to pull this one. So once you download it, I'm going to go to my download folder so I can show you. It's going to look like this. Okay. So what they did was they have an object ID, and this is coming from a database. So relational database, you need to have some kind of identification for each of the object. And then the year. So these are the fields that they would have in the database: the agency, the unit, fire name, and so on, right? The alarm date, where, you know, usually this is tied to the department, the fire department, and how they were contacted, and then the contact date, and so on. So for the acres, we would see that here. So what they do is they analyze it based on the shape of the fire, the size of the fire, and so that will be acre and shape, and then the length of the fire. And this is important for us because it really impacts the neighborhood and you know, wildlife and everything else that's around it. And you know that we're always in the fire seasons, when it's windy and when it's hot. So this is the data. So once you download that, you can take a look at it. But I want you to save it where your Python program would be. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So what I did was I went to my downloads folder. I right click and copy it. Okay. And then I have a folder called CIS30E and unit 4. Then I go in here and I paste it. So make sure that it's next to your Python file. That's number 8. So once you have it next to your Python file or in the same folder as your Python file, you're going to write the program. And let me open it up. I have it right here. Okay. So you're going to see some of the things that we've been doing, and you're going to see some additional things. And this is the purpose of this exercise, is to extend what we've been working on in the last few exercises and use real data so you can see how that works in your data frame. Okay, so we are going to import Panda as PD. We're going to import Matplotlib because we are going to plot. and we're going to import Numpy. And so the first part that I need to bring in is going to be my CSV file. The easiest way is if you have your CSV file in the same folder as your script, you don't have to put in, you know, the full path of your file. But if you don't have it next to your Python file, then you have to make sure that you specify, right, your path, where it is, like in downloads folder. It's just way complicated. I didn't want to have you troubleshoot that if you don't type in the right path. So here's the object. We are going to have, I call it fire data frame. And it's going to use Panda read CSV is a method that's built with that library or package. And it's going to read the file. Make sure that your file name is exactly the same and the file extension as how you save it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay. So you type the file name exactly the same as what you had saved. So when I downloaded, this is the name that it gives me, and I kept it the same. And when I copy it to the folder that I have my Python file, I kept it the same. Make sure we put the file extension. And as you've seen in the past, we already looked into, you know, how to read the role. But in this one, what you can do is once you have the data frame, you can actually print out, right? The first, if you leave that blank, it's going to assume that it's a 0, the first to the 5th row. So it's going to stop at the 5th, you know, index 5, but it's going to show you 0 to 4. Okay. Now, if you want to print, if you want to print from, let's say, the 6th row to the end, you can do it this way. Okay. So it just assumes that it's going to go all the way to the end if you leave it blank there. Okay. So that one, I'm going to cut that, but so here we're going to show the first 5 rows. And then you can choose a column and make sure that your column name is exactly the same. So that's why I show you, you have to open this up, right? So what I'm interested in is I wanted to read this column right here. So I simply take the column name and I put it into here. So I wanted to print the column. I select that column and I want to print it. Now it's not going to give you the entire thing. What it's going to do is going to show you like 6 or 7 rows in that column, and it's going to do a dot, 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 and it's going to show you the last few rows in that column, because the shell, it's designed to only show so many rows in a very lengthy column. What you can do is you can also change how it's displaying. You can also specify, like, you know, what you want to show from that column. But if we generally just tell it to print out the column, it's going to show the summary of that column. Let's put it that way. Okay. Then what I wanted to do was I wanted to count up the fire name that would be appearing the most in the column, because that would show me that there's certain, right, type of fire or certain region that might be highly impacted. They usually would name them the same for the same region. Okay, so I have an object called fire name, and I would use the data frame to look at the column in that data frame that's called fire name, and that exists, that's exactly what you would have, fire name right here. Okay, so make sure that it's exactly the same column name, otherwise it does not work. So I would say this is the column from the data frame, and I wanted to do a value count. This is a method that's built in with Panda. So when it does a value count, what it does is going to identify the frequency, right? It's going to tell me the number of times that a certain name appears in that column. So it's going to count the fire name and list the most common name first. Then I wanted to print it so I can see it. Then from that, I wanted to pull the top 10 because I'm curious in, what would show up the most. So I would say, so once I already have that object created and it's going to pull the data from that column and count it, it's going to store it into the fire name. Then I'm going to take the top 10. And again, we're using the index. So that's going to be blank to 10. So it's going to assume 0 to 10. And then after that, what we're going to do is we are going to take another column and we're going to graph it. And the other column is a shape area. It tells you, the value for the area of that fire shape. And so because the column is part of the data frame there, I'm going to go ahead and specify that's the data I'm going to use. Then I'm going to make another data frame called DF. And the second data frame is going to be used for graphing. So in that data frame, I'm going to say data is data, and that's the shape area column. And then I will do a histogram graph. And I will show the histogram. So hold on, let me clear this. Let me run it again, okay? Let's close this so you can see. All right, let's pull this to the right, and then let's pull this up. Okay. So here is what we did when we showed the first 5 row, right? And so we would be able to see somewhat of the column name, but it does do the ... there. And then it's also going to show you the frame there. So 5 rows and 14 columns. Now it's giving you the summary. Okay. Then I print out the shape area, and it tells me the type of data, which is float, and how long that is for that column. So how many rows in that column. Then I ask it to do a count of the fire name. So spring is the one that come up the most, that has 5 count. Creek is 4, ridge is 3, hills is 3, and flat is 3. So I believe that they named this based on the associate location, not physical location, but like it's fire near the spring, the creek, the ridge and hills and so on. So that's the count. And then the other ones are ones. Then after that, I would do a top 10 of the fire name. So it gives me the detail there. Then once I did the top 10, right, I have it plot. And there's my plot. For the shape area. Any question? I see a chat, hold on. I'm getting an error where module pandas does not have an aggregate read. Oh, you have to do read CSV. It's read underscore CS. Yeah, probably, yeah, just a quick typo. So. Okay. Any other questions? So this is a tip of the iceberg, right? Like I just wanted to take little bits and show you. So at least it's the basics you can get through by understanding how to show your rows, how to show your column, how to make your data frame and count it. And you can look at other methods too. They have a lot of different methods that you can use to read your data or, pull up certain data that you want. And then after that, we can be able to show the top 10. Then we can look, use a column or you saw how we can do multiple column already. But in this one, because depending on the data that you have, how would it make sense if you want to graph one column with another column? So you have to think about the relationship of those columns and what the data represent. So you just don't want to just throw it in a graph and then be done with. But so for number 10, when you put together your script, you need to think about what is your data representing and how those columns, what are the columns mean and how you want to use it in your program. Okay. So then we touch on data frame. We have quite a bit of practice from, the first exercise to this one on how to make different data frame. One data frame, you can have the whole entire file and then be able to use it to kind of, access certain part of that file. And then another data frame, you can use it to graph. I didn't want to graph the whole thing, so I had to create another data structure to utilize it. But if you can reuse the data structure, then, so it really depends on the goal of your program at that point, right? What are you graphing? Okay, so once you have the program running, right here, you have an example. You can use that example, but I want you to use a different CSV file. So you can use that same website, or you can find other websites. There are many other websites that have really cool data. I think I showed you that in the first week. You can also find stuff. I know Stanford, Berkeley, they do a lot of stuff with data analysis. Even, Columbia, they have some stuff. And they accumulate their own data, and they also create repository for other people's data, like tweets and things like that. But keep in mind that you want it small so you can work with it, because if it's too large, it's overwhelmingly, you have to go through and take a look at the content, and then you have to, find something that would be relevant that you can use. So find a small file, and then I want you to use that file to read, right? Display the last 3 columns of the file. Select the column and display the content of that column. And then you can also do a count again, and then find the most common value in a certain column. And then also graph a column, or you can do 2 columns if you want. Okay. So going back to the website, if you want to change the filter, right? If you are interested in other states, you can do that, but there are some data set stuff here. And then you can, you can specify, you want energy, ocean, adult health, local government, water, eco, food, health, human health. There are a lot of stuff on COVID. If you're tired of looking at COVID data, then you can look at other things, okay, like comment. But make sure, see how these are all HTML, there's no CSV. So you want to filter it to make sure that you can find CSV, okay? Like City of New York, they have to post their expenses there. So there are a lot of different stuff on there. And then if you want certain location, you can do California. Is it not setting that up for me? And then you can sort it here. Okay. And if you don't want to do this, there are national and international data. So you can also find stuff there. So if you just simply Google like data set CSV. Yeah, Kaggle has some stuff that you can also use if you want to use Kaggle. I know some math classes, they do that. So Kaggle shows like food affordability, vaccine, Olympics in Tokyo. That's interesting, right? Stock exchange, Fortnite player stats, chess game, MBA admission. So Kaggle is also cool to use. But make sure we got the CSV, okay? And then if you want things like for computer science, so data sets, we specify it. And I know some of the stuff here, they already have visualization, but from their system. And then there are We already talked about CCAN. And they have like stuff for the world, public data repository. This is from Stanford. I've seen this quite a few times. So so they have like worldwide statistics, food nutrition, popular baby names. And there's economics, ballots, government spending data. So there are a lot of places that you can pull data from. So do something that interests you, that way it will be useful and meaningful when you do that program. Okay. Any questions? All right, so we need to work on number 10 on our own using the example that's provided to you in the previous one. Okay, and also, right, if you wanted to go further, right, then take a look at the documentation and see what you can expand. You're just not limited to these if you wanted to make more, but make sure that we fulfill these requirements, and then you can add more to it if you like. Questions? Yeah, I just saw a typo that I have there. I was probably tired when I wrote that. Okay. So that's all I have for you today. Let me stop recording.